Hi YouTube, greetings and salutations. I'm Tobias and today I'm going to be bringing you a video of the top 10 albums that you should listen to whilst in social isolation. I watched a video yesterday that Josh from Lucky Chops put online of his top 10 albums of all time, but it was basically just a lot of classic jazz albums, and as much as I do love classic jazz, I know some of you might not want to listen to 10 Thelonious Monk albums in a row, so I thought I'd bring to you some recommendations of a wide variety of music. My number 10 album is the self-titled AM by Arctic Monkeys. I know it's kind of a stereotypical edgy album, but I think it's really the album where Arctic Monkeys came into their own and made them the forefront of popular edgy punk type music. I also really love it how 3 of the 12 tracks are questions. Do I want to know? Are you mine? And why do you only call me when you're high? Although Arctic Monkeys had quite a few great songs before this album, I think this is their first album where every song on the album is just really, really good. Quintessential Arctic Monkeys, and it's a really good album to listen to all the way through, which their previous albums hadn't been as such. My second album is Bad by Michael Jackson, which I know is a controversial choice, but personally I find the Bad album is better than Thriller. I know Thriller was like the top selling album of all time at the time it came out, but I think Bad is really the just where Michael Jackson was at his best. It's a consistently good album throughout, and it's got some of his most iconic songs on. It's got Bad, The Way You Make Me Feel, and Man in the Mirror, and Smooth Criminal, all of which are classic MJ songs. So that's why it's on the list and Thriller isn't. My next album is one I listened to a lot when I was younger. It's The Black Parade by My Chemical Romance, which I'm sure you'll be familiar with. My Chemical Romance were basically pioneers of the emo genre and paved the way for bands that came after them, like Panic at the Disco and Fall Out Boy, and basically they made edgy cool. It's got a lot of iconic My Chemical Romance songs on, Teenagers, Cancer, as well as Welcome to the Black Parade. I would really recommend it if you're feeling angsty in this time of quarantine, because yeah, it's just all about rebellion and ignoring the status quo. And also another really cool thing about this album is it's a 12-track album, but the LP comes as 2 vinyls, each with 4 tracks on each side. So the second disc has got 4 tracks on one side, but on the other side it's got the album cover printed. I'm not sure if you can see that, but that's just a really cool touch. I liked that they added with the vinyl. So yeah, that's another reason why it's up there on my list of albums to listen to in social isolation. My next one is kind of a cheat. It's a soundtrack really, not an album, but it's really great, and one that was really influential to me, and that is the Awesome Mix Volume 1, of course, from Guardians of the Galaxy. And I think Guardians of the Galaxy sort of paved the way for superhero films to be fun and sort of not take themselves too seriously, because before it, we had obviously the Dark Knight trilogy and the Iron Man trilogy and the first Avengers film, all of which were quite taking themselves quite seriously and gritty in the superhero genre. But because of this soundtrack, Guardians of the Galaxy showed that superhero films could have more than just being really gritty and serious, and so it paved the way for other great superhero films like Thor Ragnarok and Deadpool, and it's a really just a great mix. Obviously, it's got the 12 iconic 70s tunes: Hooked on a Feeling, Spirit in the Sky, I Want You Back, all of which are really fantastic songs, really great to listen to, but not songs that you would necessarily go to listen to from the albums that they're originally from. Those albums have these songs and then some other songs which really aren't as famous for the obvious reason that they're not as fun to listen to. But this album is really fantastic. You can listen to it all the way through and enjoy every single song, and that's why it's up on this list. My next album I'm recommending is actually another soundtrack. It's the soundtrack to Grease, because, make no qualms about it, I just really love Grease. I think it's a great musical. It's very feel good, and I think that's something we could all use at this time. I love American coming of age things, and I think that it's probably the musical that I know the most lyrics to the songs from, and just because I really love it. I think it's so fun, and it's silly, and it doesn't take itself too seriously, and John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John are just fantastic in this soundtrack and in the film, and that's why I love it so much. My next album is a classic jazz album. It's the Saxophone Colossus by Sonny Rollins. I'm not sure if you can see, but this is actually a double LP. It features Saxophone Colossus and maybe the more famous Rollins album, Tenor Madness, which is obviously Rollins and Coltrane along with him. Coltrane probably the more influential tenor sax player, but personally I've felt more of a connection with Rollins' playing, because in comparison to Coltrane, he's not too fancy. Not all of his solos are playing as many semiquavers as he possibly can. I really love the first track on this album, which is St. Thomas. It's such an energetic and sunny tune. It's probably my favourite jazz standard, and I love that St. Thomas, it's named after one of the Virgin Islands where I believe Rollins' parents came from before they moved to America. And also the last track on this album, Saxophone Colossus, the track Blue 7, is a pretty intense. Actually says on the back of the album here, it calls the solo in it the most intense solo ever committed to tape in the history of jazz. And that's quite a claim, but genuinely, if you listen to it, I think it's backed up. Rollins is just absolutely fantastic on this album, and I would really recommend it to all jazz fans. My next album is one I've been listening to a lot recently. It's Truth is a Beautiful Thing by London Grammar. London Grammar, if you're not familiar with them, they're obviously a London-based trio who do some basically soft, sort of minimalist instrumentation, to accompany Hannah Reid, that's her here, her really powerful vocals, and it's very soothing music to listen to. It's obviously very intimate and very personal to her. She's written all the songs on it, and you can really tell in her vocals that she means every word she's singing, and it's just very soothing, very calming to listen to, and obviously this is a difficult time we're going through, and so maybe that's something you're looking for, so I would really recommend this album. My next album, my number third best album, probably of all time, is After Laughter by Paramore. Originally, when the band first started, Paramore were quite an edgy punk band. Their album before this, Riot, which came out in 2013, was very shouty, and I can best describe their music as just angry, with lots of aggressive guitar sounds. But in this album, which came out in 2017, Hayley Williams makes the music much more fun. It's got a lot of synth sounds, and it's more poppy than punky, and it's easier to dance to, I suppose. Hayley Williams, she's the lead singer, and her vocals on this album really shine through a lot more than they did on the previous stuff, because I think the guitars were a little too overpowering. But this 12-track album is very varying in mood. There's some really uplifting tracks, and there's some that are more somber, obviously very personal to her, but they're also quite relatable, and I would really recommend you go check out some of the music videos if you haven't seen them from this album. They really show how the band changed from their previous album to this one, and you can even tell just with the album art. Actually, the album art for Riot was basically just a white blank slate, and then it had the word Riot written on it in capital letters all over the place. And basically, this album is so much calmer, so much cooler than their previous works, and that's why I'd really recommend it. My number two album, number two of all time, that I would recommend for you to listen to is If You're Feeling Sinister by Belle and Sebastian. If you talk to me about music for any period of time, you've probably heard me mention Belle and Sebastian. They're one of my favourite bands, and they've been really inspirational for me with my songwriting. I know for some people that might not be the most ringing of endorsements, but this is their second album. It came out in 96, I believe. It was their second album, and their first album, Tiger Milk, was really great. I really enjoyed it. It's got some very soft sounds, and it's really, really fun, really calming to listen to. But I think this one is better just because it's more consistent throughout. Every single song on this album I really enjoyed, and that's why it's one of my favourites of all time. Before I get to my number one, I'm just going to do some honourable mentions that didn't quite make my top 10 list, but are other albums that I do really enjoy listening to. I have really enjoyed previously. My first of the honourable mentions, this might come as a surprise to some people, but it's the Plus album by Ed Sheeran. I think this is Ed Sheeran at his best, when it's just his vocals and a guitar. when it first came out, one of the tracks, "You Need Me, I Don't Need You," was one of my favourite songs ever. Just because I think it's a really great song. I think Ed Sheeran really shines through it. I think it was one of the first songs of his where he rapped on it, which was maybe a controversial career move for him, but I think it really worked on that song. It's really good. And I think this is probably the best Ed Sheeran album. I'm not such a fan of his more recent work, but I think this one is just really great. It really works with just his vocals and the guitar. And it came out almost 10 years ago now, so practically retro. So if any ever there was a time to listen to it, it's probably while you got nothing else to do. My next honourable mention is another classic jazz album. It's Blue Train by John Coltrane. I know I said earlier that I'm not the world's biggest Coltrane fan, which is true, but maybe that's just because I feel intimidated by his playing. Blue Train is probably always described as an essential jazz album, and apart from Kind of Blue by Miles Davis, it's one of the most famous jazz albums of all time. It's Coltrane at his best. I think it's the album before he started playing soprano, which it makes it... I'm not dissing soprano, but it's a little bit harder to listen to. And this one is just great jazz. Blue Train is such a good tune, and also goes with this really cool blue vinyl. Who doesn't love that? My next honourable mention is this album, Revolver by the Beatles. I'm not the biggest Beatles fan in the world, but I really enjoy this album. I think it's my favourite of Beatles albums because it's sort of got a consistent theme throughout the album, if that makes sense. Consistent feel to it, I should say. Even though all four of the Beatles sing lead vocals on a song. Also came out first in 1966, which many people say was the best year ever for England. So there you go. But yeah, it's my favourite Beatles album, if for no other reason than it features their most iconic song, which is of course Yellow Submarine. And it's a really good album if you're just getting into the Beatles. Also, it's a really good album if you just want to hear some of their stuff that isn't the more mainstream songs. Like, these are the ones basically that are further down on Beatles' greatest hits record. But it's a really good album. My last honourable mention is an iconic album. It's probably one of these albums that you'd see on the most albums you have to listen to lists. And that is Random Access Memories by Daft Punk. I think Daft Punk have probably consistently made good music for about 40 years, but this album is just so fantastic and really great throughout the album. Get Lucky, of course, such an iconic song. It was number 10 it was number 1 even for about 20 weeks, I think, in a row, and it just really made Daft Punk seem so cool to me at the time. And also other songs on this album, Lose Yourself to Dance, Beyond and Motherboard, they're just absolutely sensational tunes, and that's why I really love this album. Okay, so my number one, finally, my number one album of all time that I'm recommending for you to listen to whilst in social isolation is this album, which is In the Court of the Crimson King by the band King Crimson. And King Crimson are such a cool band. And they do so many weird, innovative things that I would never have thought of in my own music to write. Their lead singer, Greg Lake, you might know from the Christmas song A Spaceman Came Travelling, and he really shines through in this album. The first song, 21st Century Schizoid Man, is one of my favourite songs of all time. It's really, really fantastic. Just the attack on those guitars, it's awesome. if for the album cover, if nothing else, you should definitely check out this album. Another thing for me to recommend before I finish this video is this book, Perfect Sound Whatever, by James Acaster, in which he reviews 366 albums from the year 2016, one for each day of the year, obviously. And there's some albums that I've heard from his recommendation that I would pass on for you to listen, that are really great, but I've not got around to getting hard copies of them just yet. And that is Friday Night by Will Butler, who was a guitarist in Arcade Fire. This album is recorded live at one of his shows, and it's really, really fantastic. You can feel the passion in his vocals. The first song on the album is actually the encore from the show, which is kind of weird, but it works, and it's very personal to him. It's very intimate, and I really love it. I'd really recommend it. Another of the albums from this book is Emily's D+ Evolution by Esperanza Spalding. Now, if you did GCSE music, you probably have heard of Esperanza Spalding before, but you might not have listened to much of her other music. And I would really recommend that you do, because Emily's D+ Evolution is a really cool album. Her vocals are amazing on it, and I love the samba feel that she adds to it. And it's a really good album. A really fun listen, but also got lots of good musical techniques for you to analyse if you're missing out on doing your music GCSE this year. And also, another album from the year 2016, which is absolutely fantastic, is The Beautiful Game by Vulfpeck. An awesome album. Vulfpeck are a crazy, crazy good funk band, and this album is my favourite of theirs. It's so funky, so cool, such a good listen. Definitely one you should check out. So I'm just about going to finish there, but I'll say, let me know in the comments what you think of my list, if there's any albums that I haven't mentioned that you think should be on it, if there's any other videos that you'd like me to make, let me know. But other than that, stay safe, love to you all, wash your hands.